Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, The Revelation of Jesus Christ, the Faithful Witness. Today we'll be talking about Lesson 13 of our study, which covers the book of Revelation, chapter 12. This is both a hard and an important one, and one of the more famous images, contains some of the more famous images from the book of Revelation as well. With the war in heaven and the woman clothed in the sun and the dragon and Michael. This has a lot of the stuff that people remember the book of Revelation for, and a lot going on. It's also challenging. The reason for that, the primary reason for that, we have the same applications of time that we've been seeing throughout the book of Revelation, which is to say, again, we're not just telling a narrative story where we had the period around the Passion in the previous chapter, and so this comes right after that. This definitely doesn't come right after that, but it does in the book, and it's told like it's a sequential story. So you think, oh, we just had some witnesses talking, and then we looked up in the sky and a woman and war in heaven, and the one happened, and then the other happened. And that's how it works. And it's not, which is challenging, but not new, right? That we've been seeing through all of these periods of 7 and through the whole book of Revelation. So while that is challenging, it is not a new thing, and it will continue to happen as well. That's one we should be kind of used to. Here in this book we see, or here in this chapter we see, to a much greater degree, a thing that we haven't seen, which is another aspect of what prophecy is, which is this idea of an archetype, of one overarching image representing many different things. Just like we've talked about this idea of a prophecy being an ultimate truth about God that manifests in different ways and in different periods of time. The same is true with these archetypes, right? So you can have two decidedly different and separate people, Eve, Mary, the mother of God, represent the same thing. And it's two people. It's not just one person. It's not just one thing. But from the eyes of God, it is one thing. And it's also at least 2 or 3 more things than that. It's also the nation of Israel, the Ark of the Covenant, and the church. Have these multiple images and manifestations. So the one thing that is probably best summarized as humanity's relationship with God manifests as Eve, the mother of humanity, as the nation of Israel, as Mary, the mother of God, as the church, as the Ark of the Covenant. And all of those are central and critical aspects of the relationship with God. But the one core truth that underlies it all, that's the prophecy component of that, right? And then there's the struggle between the devil and humanity to corrupt and destroy humanity, that manifests across different periods of time as well, and different images of the devil, and the war with heaven, and of course there's imagery around Jesus, and all of those things can look different, and can even be different, and can still be the same. And that's not an easy thing to get for us to wrap our heads around, right? The Eve and Mary one, I think, is the easiest one to see, because it gets talked about a lot. To see, oh yeah, these are the same thing, but the later version is better, right? You add more Jesus, more God, more grace on top of what was, and it becomes better, and it becomes perfect, and it becomes Mary, the Mother of God, which is humanity perfected, whereas Eve is not that. But it's just a correction or a perfection of what was. It's not a new thing. It's another pass at the same thing. And an improvement, but an improvement that needed the first one to get to it's all connected, right? And this is really important to understand about God, right? But it's really complicated because it's not how our brains work, right? We see Eve and we see Mary and we say, oh, those are two things. Those are obviously two things. They can't be one thing. But for God, who is himself three things and one thing, and both of those are true at the same time, this is not such a foreign idea. So our challenge as we go through this is going to be the two things we'll have to wrestle with are the question of when. Again, hopefully that is getting, if not completely familiar, at least a little bit comfortable and recognizable by now, and something that's not like, totally throw us at this point. Although understandably that is also hard, and is also like God exists at all times at once. So it's another case of this is a normal thing for God that is not how we're wired to perceive things. So it's a little hard. But hopefully that at least we're starting to get used to seeing in the book of Revelation. This thing about who is what, we've sort of seen, right? We've seen Jesus appear first as this, and then as that, and then as this, all over the place as a horse, and as a rider on a horse, and a lamb as though slain, and a normal guy, and probably a bunch, and Son of Man, and a bunch of things, right? And he'll be a bunch more things. We're all kind of okay with the idea of Jesus doing that, because it's Jesus. But the idea that everything does that is a little harder. And it really comes into its own here at this chapter. So that will be our big challenge. I think that's plenty by way of intro. The specific content, what's happening, what we're addressing, and what's going on, we'll get into as we read the text. Those are going to be the two big ideas that we need to track and follow through this chapter to have any chance at getting what's going on here. Here, it matters where we left off with the text. So there's a clear chapter division. It's the right place to divide the lesson in the Bible study as well. But it's really important to remember that the last thing that we saw was the opening of heaven and the introduction of the Ark of the Covenant. Because that's a big deal, right? That was lost and hadn't been seen for a long time. And then through the passion of Christ, we saw the door to heaven was open and the ark was revealed at the end. And we blew our seventh trumpet and had another woe coming. And that was all set up. And now there's supposed to be this great third woe and the action of another trumpet. And we saw the Ark of the Covenant. And then the next thing we see is a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was with child, and she cried out in her pangs of birth, in anguish for delivery. That's a big jump. Seems like a big change. First place I read this connection, I've seen it elsewhere since, but credit where credit is due. In Dr. Scott Hahn's book, The Lamb's Supper, he makes the connection, or actually I think it's Mary, Mother of God, or his Hail Mary, full of grace, whatever his Mary book is, actually. but he makes the point that the one thing and then the other thing are the same thing. And he's totally right on that, and it's easy to miss. So credit where credit's due. It's a great point. This is the Ark of the Covenant, and it is some woman who does happen to be Mary, although I don't think we're there yet. But this is the same as the Ark that we just saw. We are there. What is it that the Ark of the Covenant contains, right? And what is it, right? It is a gold box. This isn't that. This is a person that contains the 10 Commandments, the rod of Aaron, and manna from the wilderness. Bread come down from heaven. And all together, with or without those things in it, contains the presence of God, most importantly. This is a thing that exists on earth, that in it God has decided can contain his presence. It's the reason we don't need them now, right? Every tabernacle in every Catholic church is the Ark of the Covenant. It contains the presence, the physical presence of God. We have this now. We have it more than once, which is a huge deal that doesn't get enough attention or enough. We talked about it in the last video too, just reiterating, huge deal, that there was one and now there are a lot. And the one was enough to change the course of human history. So too are the lot. And we should not lose sight of that. Same thing, right? The key, the very core thing that makes the Ark of the Covenant, is not that it's made out of acacia wood or that it's covered in gold, or even that it contains these things that were very significant to the history of the people. Those are all cool. What matters is God is there. He said, you get this all set up and you do the right stuff, and I'm there. This is where I am with you, my people. So it makes, not only is it a place that God is physically, we're more powerfully at least, now physically, maybe back then not, that God is present on earth in a stronger way than God is present everywhere, is made manifest. But that by itself also creates people of God, right? Like, if you have no God, you aren't people of God. It's Abraham. We weren't talking about the people of God at the time of Abraham. We were talking about the God of Abraham and a relationship between the two of them, but you did not have a people. And then you had the people escaped from captivity, and we wanted to make a people of God. And an essential part of doing that was God, having God with the people, to make the people of God. Like, this is the thing that makes the people of Israel, which is why it was such a big deal when it was gone. And it's what makes Christians, is that presence of God with us. For us, it's more than just that Jesus is in the tabernacle that matters. It's more that we become tabernacles ourselves, matters more. But that's the thing, right? Is the presence of God manifest for his people, makes them his people. So this thing creates the people of Israel, it creates the church. And it's the Ark of the Covenant. And it's a woman who is with child. Because that child, of course, is God. Lots of things going on, and really useful to make that connection between Ark and woman. How is this woman dressed? She is 12 stars around her head are indicative of that role in having a primary place among the people of God, right? And like standing above the sun and the moon, this is an important person, right? A powerful person, central to, quite literally, the people of God. and she's with child, and she has not yet delivered her child. Who's the child? We'll see. It's Jesus. When is this happening? If the child is Jesus, this has to be happening before Jesus. That much causality in time is still a real thing in how we look at this. If she has not yet given birth to Jesus as a human, then this has to be before Jesus came to earth, before the incarnation. But narratively, this is occurring now after the chapter that talked about the Passion. So that, again, time is a little wobbly. So keep that in mind. As we read more text, we will have to get a better sense for who this is and when, because there's also the question of where. And she's in heaven and not on earth. And Mary, the mother of God, gave birth to Jesus Christ on earth. And this woman is giving birth in heaven. So is this the incarnation or is it not? Is still a lingering question. But it's the incarnation is this, but this might not be that, right? Like, that's a manifestation of this, right? Like, that's a version of this. But we get to, like, Plato's forms, right? And John was living in Greece. Maybe he liked the idea, and it fits for how some of this prophecy works, right? So I have the classic example is I have a table, right? And there are a bunch of different things. I can look at 2 or 3 different things right now that are all at least partly made out of wood that are all tables in my house. And they look very different, but I know that they're all tables because they share some common form of what it is to be a table. Philosophy's moved very far away from this idea, but the idea was that there's some like tableness, some abstract aspect of what is a table that exists, the form of table that exists outside of any particular table, that is like the essence of table, and that everything that is a table takes a share in that abstract thing that is tableness. That's really not helpful when it comes to tables. But it is helpful when it comes to the incarnation, right? Because all of these things exist in God. There can be an abstract idea of incarnation, of God's sharing his presence with humanity, that does manifest as different versions of incarnation. So this thing that we're seeing in heaven can be none of them, right? It can be the form of incarnation and not the specific incarnation of the birth of Jesus Christ, or the Ark of the Covenant being carried around in the desert, or Eve, the mother of all the living, or the church that comes later. It can be all of those things and none of those things, which is what it is, right? We're seeing the abstract that unifies all these individual things up in heaven. And we're seeing it as ark and as woman at the same time. And that's where I said this was going to be hard. But none of the details fit, right? None of the details fit any of these individual things. And if you try to make it any one of these things is contrary to, revelation about what actually happened. Because this isn't what actually happened. Some part of the what or the how or the when doesn't fit if you try to make it any one of them. If you try to make it all of them, it fits beautifully. but that is not how we're used to thinking. So that is my challenge, is that's what I think this is the abstract form of representing God's presence among his people. And from that comes, this woman is with child, right? From that comes God himself present, right? From, how's that work? In the ark, he just sort of lives there, right? In our church, he lives in us. In Mary, he becomes man. All forms, though, of through some human or human-made thing, God's presence comes to us and to our world. That's the idea here, is he uses us as the means by which he enters our world. And depending on the nature of how that works, and even the holiness of the person through which he's acting, the degree to which he enters the world matters, right? One of the few instances of the Holy Spirit acting and inspiring people very explicitly in the Old Testament is in the creation of the Ark of the Covenant, right? It matters. It has to be done in a holy way to allow the entry of the presence of God. Mary, the Mother of God, has to receive unique and special grace to bring forth the incarnation. The church requires the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Eve requires being pulled out of a rib from Adam and crafted by the hands of God himself, right? But requires also coming from Adam, and other living children come from her, right? Like, it's all of these require extraordinary and holy human activity to bring about the presence of God. Does God require that? Could God just come to the earth? Of course he could. Is that what he's doing? No. And we've seen why in the book of Revelation. We've seen forecasting of what happens if he just shows up. And it's destructive to, you cannot see the face of God and live, right? Like, this is the means by which that can be bypassed, right? Jesus Christ could be human and people could see him and live. The ark could be a thing, and as long as you didn't touch it when you weren't supposed to, you could look at it and live. And you could touch it if you did it within the rules, and if you didn't, you were going to die, even if you meant well. This is the pathway by which God and humanity can be rightly unified and in presence together without humanity dying. And the church is the latest that we're aware of form of this, but it's not the last, right? And that's what Revelation is telling us. The whole point of the book is there's at least one more place beyond where we are that follows the same form, right? And the holiness now of the church, all of us, is the thing that allows the true presence of God to come down onto earth and to be among us. The thing that we're bringing about is dependent to some extent on the holiness of and the work of the church. And all of that is contained in this idea of a woman suffering pangs of childbirth, appearing in heaven, and also the Ark of the Covenant, which is why I say this part is challenging. Next archetype. This one is the devil, great red dragon. What does he look like? I'm not going to get super into numbers of heads and horns and things, but there's a good and important point here. A couple. First, the image is from Daniel, right? We're still pulling puzzle pieces together from elsewhere and reassembling a new thing. So we've decided the core and key central image of the devil we're pulling in dragon here, although he will also appear, has appeared and will appear as other things. 7 heads and 7 diadems is worth talking about because it tells us something important about the role of the devil, especially as related to humanity. What is 7 in the Bible? Hopefully by now you're tracking that one. We've talked about it a lot in Revelation. We'll talk about it more. It is a complete but a not perfected thing, right? You have 7 days in a week, and you finish your week, you start over with another one. It doesn't come to an end. It's a self-contained unit, but it is not a perfect thing. It is a thing in want of perfection, that is complete as it is, but is definitely not perfect. That is the devil's rule on earth. It's not perfect. But for a time, it's there, right? That's why the way he's portrayed is not here doing battle with the woman, but awaiting the birth of her child. Because that child will be the one who bears the rule that the devil is not, right? So until that child comes, the devil rules on earth. And when that child comes, the devil no longer rules on earth. So that's kind of the relationship here. There's this period of time before the birth of the child by the woman where the devil has power and authority. And then there's the period of time after that where that's not the case anymore. The child replaces the rule of the devil with something else. And the child we know comes from God, and the devil we know is at odds with God. And so that's our central conflict, right? This is, as we're portraying it in heaven, the key characters that we have are 3, and God the Father isn't one of them. Because if he intervenes, it's over, right? It's the thing that he's letting play out for the sake of humanity. So we have the woman who represents humanity and God's relationship with and presence with humanity. You've got the devil who's set to oppress and destroy and accuse humanity. And you've got the child who is God coming via the woman into and present among humanity to conquer, to do battle with, and ultimately overthrow the devil and to free humanity from the devil's rule. Right? Those are our 3 players, and that's the pattern that throughout all history plays out in different forms, right? Again, example, but as the people of God became the people of God, they were oppressed by foreign ruling powers, and those were overthrown, and God became their king, right? And you had the ark at the same time. That's not an accident, right? It gets treated as different things, but you don't become the people of God. You don't become free and governing and all of the things that they became without the Ark of the Covenant. But you also had to cast out the oppressor who was Pharaoh. And obviously Jesus Christ, overthrowing death itself, is the most prominent one of these, part of this pattern. But I wouldn't say that it's done, would you? Our world is changed by the act of Christ, but the march goes on, right? The church is now a key player here, and there's more, right? Like, this pattern is still playing out. There's still in your soul, in my soul, and in the destiny of all of humanity an open question. We're not done yet. This pattern is playing out as we speak, on a micro level in each of us, and on a macro level still in our world. Again, right, the key parts of the pattern and pieces of how this works exist across time and space. And these archetypes persist and remain there. So was the devil waiting in heaven for the birth of Christ in heaven at some point 2,000 years ago? Definitely not, because Christ was born on earth and the devil wasn't there to eat him as a dragon. That's not a thing that happened, but it is a thing that happened in the archetypical sense of Christ was born on earth, the devil did battle against him, even thought he won, and then he didn't, and Christ took up the reign. It happened as God created his people in Egypt. It's happened throughout history, and it will happen until the end of history. And it's the same pattern, and it's the same, these are the core pieces that affect the relationship between God, the devil, and us, and will affect us. And these are archetypical presentations of those key essential elements of humanity and our relationship with God and the devil. And that should be your takeaway here. And not trying to place this as any time in history, past, present, or future. Because it is, but it also isn't. And it will be deeply confusing to try to do so. And it won't fit. That's, I think, in part what has led some, famously Martin Luther, to say, this doesn't reveal, this book shouldn't be in the Bible. Well, it depends on how you read it. But if you are trying to make this specific prophecy about any one point in time in the future ever, that's actually a good and rational response, right? I prefer Luther's "this doesn't reveal, let's pull it out of the Bible" to this one thing is talking about, like, we'll get to it in the next lesson, but this beast and the 666 is clearly Nero and the oppression of Rome, is a worse take than Luther's "let's get this book out of the Bible," because at least he understood that it didn't reveal any particular point in human history. But he did miss that that's not what it's trying to do. That's not the project or the point, right? And it can still tell us human destiny, the future outcome of our church, without telling us when or how it happens, by saying this particular guy on this particular date is going to do this particular thing, and that's going to be significant for all history. That's not happening. But where we go, and vaguely some sense of how we get there, absolutely. And the point is, that was there in the Old Testament and in the Gospels, if you know how to look. The point is, we don't know how to look. So John had a vision. He understood how to look at these things and to see something new that was contained there all along. And so we are seeing that vision. And these are the components and elements of that vision. This is not a narrative story. I'm going to keep repeating that because it's so counterintuitive. Hopefully we can all get on that page by now. This is a revisioning of prophecy, of divine revelation. And it's a reassembling of all of those parts. So this now continues setting the stage for parts of what this pattern looked like. We also saw, after the child was born, being caught up to God and his throne, which is another essential element of who that God-child ruler is. What about the woman? There's more to her than just giving birth, because she represents all of us, as well as the means by which God comes into humanity. She also represents and is humanity. Especially the people of God. Not all of humanity so much as the people of God. So where is she then? She's in the wilderness. We first have a people of God wandering in the wilderness in the book of Exodus, right? Like, that is a core. They have this promised land that is to come, but that's always promised. And the core of their identity is wandering in the wilderness. And we're still that way, huh? We're still, as the church, wandering in the wilderness of this world, waiting to, still journeying to enter the promised land. It is a core aspect of the people of God that we live and journey in the wilderness toward the promised land, toward some kind of fulfillment. So the woman, as the representative of all of, hopefully, us who are the people of God, spends time in the wilderness, in a place prepared by God, in which to be nourished. As they were wandering in the wilderness, God fed them. As we wander in the wilderness still today, God feeds us, in both cases with bread from heaven, in which to be nourished. For how long? Now we get one of these time things again. For 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years if you have 360-day years, which we saw in the previous lesson. We're seeing it, and chapter, we're seeing it again. This is a period. The important part is not that it is years or that it is days. It's that it's a period of 3.5. So this is part of a bigger period of time. And this is 3.5, so this is the first half of a period of time. The place of the child who is born, who is the ruler and is God, is also in heaven with God. The place of humanity and the role and aspect of humanity at this point in time is to be wandering in the wilderness. Now we get something a little different. Something changes, right? When talking about these archetypical realities, those are things that just are, as surely as gravity is. And are, although they manifest differently, they always are. Here is a thing that changes, which means we're not only tracing what those archetypes are, but we're tracing some of their evolution through history. The 3.5 is going to be an important clue to that as well, because this is happening after that. So we have a period of time, and then we have this, and then we're going to have another period of time. What is this? This is war in heaven, with Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. When did that happen? Oh, we all have read Paradise Lost. We know that that happened. Sorry, we've all read Genesis. Although it's honestly more described in Paradise Lost than it is in the Bible, that this happened at the beginning of time. But we know that some form of this happened at the beginning of time. And this isn't that, because we had time. We just had time before this, right? We just had, and humanity's already on Earth in the wilderness. We just had 3.5 times, units of time, years, but that isn't the part that matters, before this. So this comes at a midpoint, not at the beginning. This is a thing that happens once, period, as opposed to some of these other things, but it sort of happens again in a different way. So, beginning of time, you have God, and you have all of his angels who are created with free will, as are humans, and are given full knowledge. So, as opposed to us who have to learn things and grow throughout our lives, they knew everything that they were ever going to know from the moment that they were created. And so some of those angels said, I don't like God, I like me. And exercised their free will in a way that set them against God, as we also do, or can do. The difference being we can learn and grow and evolve, and they don't. So their decision was once for all, whereas we can change our mind, which is, if you think about it, quite a tremendous blessing to be able to change one's mind and to learn and grow. So some of those angels exercised their one moment of free will to set themselves in opposition to God. And so there is war, there is opposition between God and his angels, led by Michael, in battle, and the angels who chose against God. What kind of battle is this? You were just created by all-powerful, all-knowing God, from nothing, and you're going to make war against him. You have zero chance, right? This is like a junior high football team playing against the NFL champions, right? It's comically underqualified and under-equipped to have any chance at all, which is a point that we have to keep making through the book of Revelation, because if you're not going to read this closely enough, you think Team Evil had a chance. And that's not at all what's happening here. They never had a chance against God or against God's angels. And they fought and they lost, which was the only thing that could happen. And they were thrown out of heaven. So that's the beginning of time. But as we've talked about, the battle continues, right? And up until the time of Christ, the way that they were doing battle did have implication for an effect on heaven, because we couldn't go there. So they warred indirectly against heaven and kept us from heaven. And in the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ, that changed. And so their influence over the kingdom of heaven was destroyed. So although we're not fighting constantly through all eternity, some great battle in heaven, with an undecided outcome and no clear idea who or how anybody's going to win, and you better grab your sword and chime in and jump in, or God's team might lose. None of that. God's team won. Heaven has been free of evil from then. There was just that really brief period of time where some angels who were in heaven decided they didn't want to serve God, and then they weren't in heaven. And then it was done. And they're never going to be in heaven again. And that's that. But then there was this longer period of time where they made war against God's creation and affected heaven and made heaven be not what God wanted it to be, right? They could still affect heaven and even harm it insofar as God wants us there. And until Christ, they kept all people from heaven. From the first people to every other person, from Adam to Christ, they kept out of heaven. So they did harm to heaven and to God's plan for humanity. They were, in a sense, they were winning. Right? But not in the sense that they could ever beat God, but in the sense that they could make God's creation not what he wanted it to be. And the purpose for heaven is as much for us, shockingly, as God doesn't need a place to be God, right? Like literally does not need a place at all to be God. Like space and time are things that are here for us, not for God. Insofar as heaven is a place for us to be there, not for God to be there. Heaven, as much as earth and hell, is the thing that is a place to hold us, not a place for God to be. God does not need a place to be, which again, not a thing that we can conceive of super well, because that's not how our brains interpret reality. But insofar as heaven is a place for you and me. And we weren't there and couldn't be. So in a sense, the devil was winning over in some limited capacity, but he was winning, right? By all of humanity being damned, heaven was empty and not what it was intended to be. And then Jesus came. And then that's not true anymore. Heaven's no longer closed. People can enter into heaven. And so the devil's reach into heaven, even while he's not there, even that dissolves, right? And not only future looking, but Jesus grabbed all of those people from before and said, oh yeah, those old rules, those didn't work out very well for you, but you know what? There are new rules and they apply retroactively. Come on, and the door's open. And so even people who had previously not been allowed into heaven. So the victory is complete and retroactive, right? Meaning that it basically never was. So that's how God wins, right? He doesn't just win like moving forward, but he wins like back to Adam, and he's okay, but like I still won the whole time. That's complete and total victory. But it's not done, right? Because we still have hell, earth, and heaven. So heaven is now what it was meant to be after Christ. But earth is meant to be heaven. We know that because although we're not trying to get back to the garden exactly, originally God was down here with us in this paradise, in this garden on earth. And then he wasn't. He will be again. Right, that's where we've talked about it a lot, and we will talk about it a lot. That's where we're going. It's one thing for us to be up in heaven with God. It's another thing entirely for heaven to be. We don't need these separations of heaven, earth, and hell. There can be one place, and it can be where everyone is, and there can be no danger. It can be, in that sense, it can be paradise like the garden. There's one place where all of the people are, and they're with God, and it is paradise. That is where we're going, but the state of humanity has changed radically from how it was in the garden to how it can be then, right? Like, we're different. So we're not just trying to redo that, right? Because we know what happened there. That was assailable, right? That was open to intervention of the devil and destruction of humanity. The end one, the one we're working toward, will be final and will not be open to assault. It will be inassailable. So we're not just we are, in a sense, trying to go back to the state that we had in the garden, but it will be the relationship between God and humanity will be so fundamentally different. It's not the same thing at all. But some of that original state gives us a clue, again, putting together a puzzle, gives us a clue about what's intended in our end state. At this point, I'm hopeful this makes sense. With the setup from the previous question, probably bled into this a little bit, but it does sort of bleed together. So this is victory, right? This is the victory of Jesus Christ. So this battle in heaven This is how we know this is the victory of Jesus Christ that is being talked about, though, right? And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God, right? This brings home what we talked about in the previous question, right? So this is the result of that battle and that victory. So Christ's is the victory. And the effect is that there is no longer constant accusation in heaven keeping people out, as we talked about. And all of heaven is celebrating this great victory, and it's only half the victory, right? This is, again, heaven is opened in heaven. That's the first half. There's a much fuller victory yet to come. More that hopefully makes sense now. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives, even unto death. Rejoice then, O heaven, and you that dwell therein. People are in heaven now. People who have, by the blood of the Lamb, explicitly conquered and loved God more than their lives and have entered heaven. Great. People are in heaven. Celebrate. And every person in heaven gets to share in the victory because it is their victory as well. Because they have each individually also conquered the devil, right? Like, we've been given tools, arms by Christ to do that, right? You and I, we can conquer the devil, but we have to win too, right? Jesus beating the devil is a trivially easy thing to do. Like his father beating the devil is a trivially easy thing to do, which is not to say that it wasn't awful as well, right? Like, he still bore the scars of battle, right? Not because he had to, but because that's what saves us, right? By the blood of the Lamb are we saved, right? He did that so we can also win. He could just win, right? He didn't need to win that way. Like, he could just win. Winning that way allows us to win. But we still have to fight. He gave us arms that are capable of harming, of conquering the devil. But we still have to fight our fight as well. So rejoice, everybody who does win the fight and enter into heaven and dwells in heaven. We were, though, expecting some sort of woe, were we not, when we came into this chapter? But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. So the devil's reach into heaven is no more. So earth and sea, area under the earth and beyond, earth and hell, right? The devil still has direct influence over. And when he is lost to Jesus and lost his hold on humanity, he's so much more is he going to lash out at everyone that he can still get his hands on. When his rule on earth is not absolute and not complete, and he cannot damn every soul that God created, he's going to try all the harder to get to the ones that he can. Because he knows even that time is limited, right? There will come a time where even that he cannot do. So this is that period, right? There was the time, 3.5 units of it, where he won and he ruled on earth and he damned every soul. Even that church that was wandering in the wilderness, that woman, sorry, both are true, everyone ended up under the power of the devil. But now, not so much. But the takeaway is you don't have to be under the devil's power now. But that's your choice. Before, it wasn't, you just were. Now, you don't have to be, but it's still your default position as a person is still to be damned, and you have to take in Christ extraordinary measures to find salvation. It is not a thing to take for granted. It's not a thing to think, oh, I'll be fine, because I said, yeah, I go to church here and there, and I've signed myself with holy water, and I say that I'm Christian. I've taken His name upon myself, so I'm good. Like, that's not enough if you're not doing the things that implies. Your default state is still death and damnation. That is the ordinary fate of humanity. To not come to that fate, you must do an extraordinary thing with your life. That's still true. Our culture, our society of entitlement normalizes too much this idea of salvation and treats it like it's guaranteed, takes it for granted. That's dangerous. That's the devil lashing out and telling you to take for granted what has been offered, to the point that maybe you lose it. He's still trying mightily to damn every soul. And so we are still, again, quite literally in the fight of our lives. We have the means of winning, right? Like, the thing is, if you exercise your will toward God, the devil cannot beat you, right? Like, you can beat you, the devil can't, is the state of the battle that we are in. Like, he can not compel, he can persuade, he can tempt you to abandon God, and to damn yourself. But he can't make you. Like, only you can lose. Which is really the same reason that the battle is such a gimme for God and Jesus, right? Because their will is firm, and so they cannot lose. But we can change our mind, we can wobble, and we can be tempted. We have the same power to overcome that they do, right? We have literally been given a share of God's power to resist the devil, with the same outcome of being entirely invincible, if and only if we exercise our will constantly in the direction of God and love God. And anything that veers from that opens us up to losing. But that is so different from a normal sporting event, right? Like, I like the football analogy, but like, if you're playing football and somebody told you all you had to do is really intend very hard in your will to win the game, and you would always win the game, you're not losing any football games, right? Like, easy. But if someone says you have salvation and all you have to do is be fixed and firm in your intent, and you will win salvation, but I can do that later. Let's try some damnation first. It looks fun. And then I'll come back around to it later. Because of how sure the victory is when we choose it, we take it for granted. This is a roundabout way of saying don't do that, right? And just a reflection on why and how we might take it for granted. Like, I'm not less guilty of that than any of you listening to this. It's food for thought for all of us. Let us not take it for granted, and let us grasp and hold tightly to the salvation that has been offered to us, so that we don't eternally regret it. So we won, and the devil is still God won, and the devil is still desperately making war on those of us who are left. So we had a before, and now we have an after. The devil was waiting for the child to be born to get it. and leaving the woman alone. Why does the devil need to attack humanity directly when everybody's already damned? The one to attack is the one who might change that. But he failed. The child was born, the child was victorious. So now every individual person is somebody who could win. So now he is pursuing the woman, the people of God, all of us, right? This isn't just Mary, the mother of God. This is church. This is all of us. He is pursuing those of us who might escape. But the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle, that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time. The church is now, at our discretion, able to be safe, right? We can fly away from temptation and from the devil, and even in this life find safety. It's what we were talking about, right? If your will is firmly fixed on God, there's nothing that the devil can do to you. You are safe now, even though he is now directly trying to do war on you. You are safe if you so choose it. So that's point 1. Point 2 is how long, right? So a time and times. Elsewhere in the Old Testament, we see a time and 2 times mentioned sometimes, which helps clarify that is meaning 2. And a half a time. You've got 3.5 again, right? So you've got 3.5 years before, you've got 3.5 days after. Again, the units don't matter. You've got a period of 7 time. We saw the same with the witnesses, right? We saw unmatched units that still gets to a period of 7. So if you're following along, counting along with me, as we get to these, there are a number you can probably guess, more of them left to get to. We have this first week of seals, 7 of them. We have the second week of trumpets, 7 of them. We have this third week of the period of the witnesses, 7 of it, in various forms. And now we have this 4th week of time in the wilderness. So we've got 4 of those 7 of these, let's just call them weeks, because they are time bound, and it'll be easy if we look at them as weeks, and that'll have a lot of great payoff later. So we're at 4 and counting. It would be pretty easy to start speculating on how many of those we might get, but again, it'll be fun payoff if we don't spoil it. But it's 7. I think everybody can probably guess that at this point. With these last couple of these weeks, we have seen a thing that was not in the first 2, right? We saw, which is a halfway point, centering around Christ, right? So these weeks have been things that encompass all of time. And we kind of talked about the earlier ones like they might have done the same, right? So this isn't 7 weeks back to back. This is 7 weeks kind of on top of each other, but it's still, but of course all of creation is still this repetitive, never-ending, never perfect thing, right? And that's where we're trying to get beyond, is all of creation was from the beginning in 7 days made, and was going to be the thing that it was meant to be on the 8th day that never came. So you're repeating, you're cycling your 7 days, and you're never at your 8th. All you need is an 8th day of creation past your 1 week that repeats forever, and creation becomes what it was meant to be and is a new thing. So each of these weeks stacks, and all of creation can be seen as it is at the very beginning of the Bible as a week. Hint, it wasn't created in 7 days to begin with. I know that's a shocking idea to some people too, but that's not meant to be taken literally either, right? Like, and again, pieces are being reassembled spectacularly, and those 7 letters reminded at the beginning, although not one of these weeks that we're looking at, reminded us to look back to the creation of the world and to see the creation of the church as a sort of a restatement of that as well, and help to make sure we had in our heads the creation of the world from the beginning of this book as well, because we're going through all history over and over and over and 4 more overs and building from it as well. So a time, times, and half a time gets us to another 7. Something I missed commenting on a couple verses ago, but it's going to come up in this question, and it's sort of interchangeable, is, again, you've got this archetype of devil as big red dragon, also in this chapter interchangeably portrayed as serpent, mostly interchangeably. I don't think it's an accident that here now, while we were engaged in big strong war up in heaven, the devil was big red dragon, and now when he's trying to overcome humanity here on earth, he appears as serpent. That's our first appearance of the devil in the Bible, is as serpent, right? And as tempter. Try to imagine how that story goes if he looks like a big scary dragon, versus like a little snake. Oh, Eve, I think you should get like huge dragon. Like, he's not getting anywhere with that, right? Like, the idea that the devil appears in a deceptive and seemingly harmless form, as a means of tempting us, that's like inherent to and critical to the temptation, right? If it looks like what it is, then we say, I don't think I'm hungry, big red dragon. I'm good. Versus tiny little snake can, pun intended, worm its way into our minds and get us to think otherwise. So if the devil in his temptation appeared as the death and destruction that he is, then nobody's choosing that. So, and that's a fundamental aspect to how it is the devil does war on humanity, is he disguises who he is and what he offers. So there's that. But the serpent and dragon are used interchangeably even in this section, and that's fine, right? Things can be different things, but it's not accidental. Beyond that, then, he is trying to kill the woman, right? The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with the flood. What did the flood do? The flood was water that brought death and tried to unmake humanity, right? The devil tries to kill, destroy, unmake, especially the church, as a constant thing, streaming out, but fails, right? Again, because the devil can't overcome anything that won't let itself be overcome. And interestingly, the earth itself comes to, like, the idea of the flood is that the whole earth gets buried, right? Everything gets killed. The devil doesn't even have that power, right? Like, the earth itself is there as something that this flood from the devil can't. The devil's not God, right? God's form of that is water. Everything covered in water. The devil's form is water. Oh, can't even get the earth, right? The devil's power is, we've got heaven, earth, the thing God carved out from the waters under the earth, and waters under the earth. The devil doesn't even have direct power over, doesn't even control the earth, right? Like, the earth itself is not the area, the realm of the devil, and his power here is limited as well, right? His power, where he has total power, is only in the realm of death. in hell. And he only wins here where it's granted to him by us to win. So he's angry, but when it comes to overcoming the woman, especially the mother of God, he's quite impotent in that regard, right? Like, there's the whole thing about God will put enmity between you two, and he can't do anything to you, right? This is that. He cannot do anything to her at all. And that's to Mary, the mother of God, and that is to the church. The church is the institution that is the church. The devil can never conquer either. He can corrupt and damn individual members, and he can try to overcome the church in doing so, and surely does. But the church as the institution established by God, he cannot conquer either. But he sure can get some members here and there. So then we see in image form what that looks like, right? The devil is standing on the sand of the sea, right? The sand of the sea is not like the beach, right? It could be, but it's like of the sea is like, that's the liminal, the threshold space between earth and sea, right? Like you've got a beach. At some point you've got land. At some point you've got water. And at some point you've got both, right? It's like, it's the liminal or threshold space between sea and land. That's where the devil can be, right? That's his reach onto the earth, is on the threshold, on the door, in the doorway. And he can stand there and he can lash out. And he can do he can damn a lot of people doing that. But the earth is not his realm any more than heaven is. He can extend his power there, and he finds ways to do that, and that's part of what we'll talk about in the next lesson, is what he can still do from where he is, which is a lot. But it's important to keep in mind how limited his power is, and how absolute God's, and if we want it, our power is. The victory is ultimately won. And your place in that is your decision. As we've talked about before, and we'll talk about again, that's the key takeaway here, is you can win if you want to. This has been an overview of Lesson 13 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study, the revelation of Jesus Christ, the faithful witness. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.